as the skyscrapers in Manhattan glimmered in the twilight. Ellis Carville was busily moving her fingertips. Around her, the atelier staff were starting to prepare to go home. Yet she couldn't take her eyes off the fabric she was working on. "Ellis, you can go home now," said her boss, smiling gently, her hair neatly mixed with gray. "I'm almost finished. The draping isn't quite ideal yet. Your collection will be wonderful. But it's important to rest sometimes." Ellis sighed deeply and looked back at the fabric. Next month, she will present her first collection named after herself. Since being promoted to exclusive designer 6 months ago, she had dedicated everything to this opportunity. "Don't you have dinner with Scott?" At those words, Ellis hurriedly checked her watch. "Oh, it's already 7 o'clock." As she quickly put away her sketchbook and fabric samples, Ellis repeated words of apology in her mind. Scott Lawrence, her boyfriend, is the heir to a luxury hotel chain. 2 years ago, they met at the reception party of a newly opened hotel by his family, where Ellis was in charge of the staff uniforms and the dress code for the venue. Since then, their relationship had progressed smoothly. Jumping into a taxi, Ellis fixed her hair and makeup on the way to the restaurant. The upscale hotel's top-floor restaurant owned by Scott's family overlooks Central Park. "I'm sorry for making you wait." When Ellis arrived breathlessly, Scott was waiting for her at a window seat. Dressed in a deep blue suit, he looked more charming than ever. "Your hard work is part of your charm." Scott stood up to greet Ellis and pulled out her chair. Ellis felt warmth in her heart from his gentlemanly gesture. "But think about me sometimes too," he said with a joking tone, though Ellis thought she saw a shadow flicker in his eyes. However, the waiter approached quickly and prompted them to order wine. At the scenic window seat, Ellis passionately talked about her upcoming collection. Growing up in a small town in North Carolina, becoming an exclusive designer for a top brand in New York was beyond her wildest dreams. However, her efforts, starting as an unknown assistant after winning a scholarship and attending fashion school, were about to bear fruit. "You'll come to see my first collection, won't you?" "Of course," Scott replied with a smile, though he seemed lost in thought. That night, Ellis woke up in Scott's penthouse. Looking at his sleeping face beside her, she felt she was living the best life possible. Yet she didn't know that it wouldn't last forever. Scott's mother, Veronica Lawrence, was nervously fiddling with a high-quality leather handbag on her lap. Sitting at a window seat in an upscale cafe facing the main street, she occasionally glanced at the passing crowd, apparently waiting for someone. When the waiter brought the third espresso, the awaited person finally arrived. A solemn middle-aged woman removed her sunglasses as she approached Veronica's table. "I'm sorry for keeping you waiting." "No, I'm the one who called suddenly." Amelia Fairfax's mother sat down gracefully. Her every gesture exuded the dignity of a family lineage of bankers. "I have something to discuss about Scott and Amelia," Veronica said, glancing around before continuing in a lowered voice. "It might be time to seriously consider their future." Amelia's mother raised her eyebrows slightly. She silently beckoned the waiter, ordered chai, and then turned back to Veronica. "Indeed, Amelia is at a suitable age." "Yes, and Scott is 35. It's time to think about the future of the family." A brief silence fell between them as soft classical music played in the cafe. But Veronica continued carefully. "There's one thing that concerns me now." That woman understood Amelia's mother immediately. Ellis Carville's presence was somewhat a topic in Manhattan's upper echelons. The fact that an unknown designer was dating the heir to the Lawrence family spurred various speculations. Just a country girl getting carried away with sudden success, Veronica said, unable to hide her irritation. We must do something before it damages my son's future. You're right. Family ties are built on generations of trust. Amelia's mother subtly flaunted her family's noble origins. Amelia has known Scott since they were children. Their marriage seems like fate. Yes, I think so too, Veronica agreed eagerly. Amelia would be perfect as the wife of a hotel chain heir. They continued their discussion, planning the specifics of the wedding, its scale, and most importantly, how to convince Scott. I'll talk to Scott, Veronica said determinedly. A mother knows her son best. As they left the cafe, a rough plan had formed between them. Outside, people were enjoying the spring weather, and Manhattan buzzed with its usual vitality. However, amidst the bustling scene, the two women had just shared a conversation that could significantly alter someone's life. That night, Veronica sat in her living room facing her husband. It's for Scott's future. But the girl is not at fault, her husband said tiredly. Not being at fault is precisely the problem, Veronica replied firmly. If we let this relationship continue, it will lead to irreparable consequences. 2 weeks after the success of her collection, Ellis was sketching new designs at her desk in the atelier. Favorable reviews from critics had ignited her creative drive anew. Ellis, there's a phone call. When she looked up at the sound of her colleague's voice, she was told it was Scott on the line. It was unusual for him to call during the day. There's something I need to talk about tonight. The usual restaurant at 7 o'clock. Scott's voice sounded slightly different. Is it wonderful news? Ellis asked with hope. Lately, Scott seemed to be hiding something, and she secretly hoped, perhaps tonight. No, it's just. Scott hesitated. Let's talk tonight. Even after hanging up, Ellis's heart was pounding. Her collection had been a success, and her relationship with Scott was going well. Maybe tonight would be the moment. As evening approached, Ellis carefully chose her attire. A simple black cocktail dress complemented by a pearl necklace, a gift from Scott. When she arrived at the restaurant, Scott was already seated. The Manhattan skyline sparkled outside the window. But as soon as she sat down, Ellis felt something was off. Scott seemed restless and didn't even touch his wine. Scott? Ellis, there's something I need to say. Scott began seriously. In that moment, a wave of anxiety washed over Ellis. I want to end things between us. It took her a few seconds to comprehend the gravity of his words. What do you mean? Ellis's voice trembled. You're a wonderful woman. Talented. But. Scott paused, searching for words. I don't see a future for us. A future not visible? Ellis was confused. Weren't we doing well? My mother says, considering our family's position. Your mother? A rush of previously felt discomfort overwhelmed Ellis. Veronica's cold stares, Scott's recent behavior. There's also the new hotel. I have to consider relationships with business partners. You understand, right? Ellis silently shook her head. She didn't understand. She didn't want to. Because I'm not from an upper-class background? Or because I don't have enough accomplishments yet? It's not about that, Scott began to show irritation. We were always from different worlds. Those words pierced Ellis's heart like a knife. What were these 2 years then? They should remain as good memories. Scott's voice was cold, as if their warm days together were a lie. You wouldn't understand, but this is for the best. At that moment, Ellis noticed the change in Scott's tone. Just now, their relationship had completely changed. Ellis stood up, trembling. "Don't go," Scott called out. "At least stay for the meal." "No, thank you." Ellis answered with her back straight, trying to maintain her last shred of dignity. Leaving the restaurant, the cold night air hit her, and tears began to flow. Her hand trembled as she tried to hail a taxi. The smartphone screen showed her smiling face from a few hours ago. Staring at the photo, Ellis wondered if it all had been a dream. However, the pain in her chest told her this was reality. Days after the sudden breakup, Ellis buried herself in work, desperately hiding her heartache. Her reputation as a designer was on the rise. She was the first to arrive in the morning and worked late into the night. Her colleagues noticed the change but couldn't bring themselves to speak up. "I want the next collection to be even more innovative," Ellis passionately explained to her boss. However, his expression was cloudy. "Ellis, come to my office for a moment." As she entered the office, the HR manager was already waiting. A foreboding feeling rushed through Ellis. "Have a seat," her boss said quietly. Ellis stiffened her back as she sat down. "We need to discuss your recent work." "Is there a problem with my work?" Ellis tried to calm her voice. Indeed, she had been emotional since breaking up with Scott. But the quality of her work hadn't declined. "Your recent designs are becoming incompatible with our brand image." The HR manager began, looking down at the documents. "Some buyers have commented that your designs are overly experimental." "But the critics' reviews?" "It's not about reviews," her boss interrupted. "Surviving in this industry is all about sales." Ellis tried to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Also, the HR manager continued. "Several important clients have expressed a desire to hold off on dealings with you." At that moment, Ellis pictured Veronica Lawrence. "This is wrongful termination." Ellis's voice trembled. "It's termination due to insufficient ability," the HR manager coldly declared. "Today will be your last day." Ellis returned to her desk and opened the drawer. She packed her sketchbooks and fabric samples into a cardboard box, her hands shaking. Her colleagues discreetly continued their work, avoiding looking at her. Stepping out onto the street, she was struck by a sudden sense of emptiness. What now? She realized she hadn't eaten much since morning. Yes, she would consult her Aunt Belinda, a fellow designer who could surely offer some advice. She took out her smartphone and dialed Belinda's number. "Belinda? Ellis? What's wrong? Your voice sounds different." "I was suddenly fired today." "Can we meet to talk?" "Yes, of course." "Come to my office right away." As she was about to get into a taxi, Ellis felt a slight dizziness. Maybe she was just tired. But as the taxi started moving, the dizziness intensified. "Are you okay, ma'am? You look pale." The driver's voice seemed to fade away. Ellis's vision began to blur. She tried desperately to stay conscious, but darkness enveloped her. In the last moments before her consciousness slipped away, a strange thought crossed her mind. Could all the events of the past few weeks have been just a bad dream? Could she wake up to her happy days once again? However, reality had a much more unpredictable plot waiting for her. A white ceiling slowly came into Ellis's view. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air. It took her a moment to realize she was in a hospital room. It looks like you've regained consciousness, a doctor in a white coat said gently. Ellis tried to sit up slowly but felt discomfort from the foreneedle in her arm. The taxi driver brought you to the emergency hospital. Turning towards the voice, Ellis saw Belinda sitting on a chair, looking worried. The driver found my contact and called me. Ellis gradually began to remember. She had been fired, and she was on her way to see Belinda. The test results are in, the doctor began. First, I want to talk about your condition. The doctor glanced at Belinda momentarily. I am her aunt, Belinda informed, and the doctor nodded slightly. Ellis, the doctor continued in a calm voice. You are pregnant. Ellis's mind went blank. Pregnant? With Scots. And, the doctor chose his words carefully, you are carrying quadruplets. Quadruplets. Ellis's voice trembled. Yes, quadruplets. A heavy silence fell in the room. Outside the window. The hustle and bustle of Manhattan continued, yet to Ellis. It all seemed like a distant world's events. This is an extremely rare case, the doctor started to explain. The chances of naturally conceiving quadruplets are about 1 in 700,000. It took Ellis a while to comprehend the numbers. You are in the first trimester. The nausea is quite strong and is likely what caused your anemia and fainting today. Unconsciously, Ellis placed her hand on her abdomen. Beneath it, 4 small lives were nestled. Pregnancy with quadruplets carries more risks than a normal pregnancy. The doctor continued. We need to talk about how you should proceed. At that moment, Ellis's vision blurred again. This time, it was not from fainting but from tears. Ellis. Belinda squeezed her hand. What am I to do? Ellis's voice was hoarse. I have no job, no income, and now 4 babies at once. The doctor quietly left the room, likely considering their privacy. You don't have to handle this alone, Belinda's voice carried a strong resolve. I will do everything I can to help. Ellis nodded silently, but her heart was swirling with immense uncertainty. She painfully felt that her life had changed irrevocably. Outside, the evening sky was dyed red. The skyscrapers of Manhattan loomed as if watching over her. Could she raise 4 lives in this city? And should she tell Scott about this? Ellis's heart continued to waver with these unanswered questions. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back. From now on, she must walk a path she had never imagined. Belinda continued to hold her hand in silence. 3 days after being discharged, Ellis lay on the couch in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. The doctor had ordered her to rest. But being alone with her thoughts all day was difficult. The medical report read severe anemia and fatigue due to a multiple pregnancy. Quadruplets. No matter how many times she repeated the word in her mind, she could not accept it as reality. How are you feeling, Ellis? Belinda entered the room, carrying shopping bags. Since the discharge, she had been visiting daily. No change. Ellis tried to sit up, but felt a slight dizziness. Don't push yourself, Belinda said as she began taking groceries out of the bags. I'll make some nutritious soup today. The sound of a pot being taken out could be heard from the kitchen. Ellis covered her face with both hands. I can't do this, Belinda. What can't you do? Everything, Ellis's voice trembled. Raise 4 children. As a single mother. And without a job. Belinda stopped her kitchen activities and sat down next to Ellis. Women around the world become mothers under unexpected circumstances. But quadruplets. It may be hard, sure. But you have talent. Ellis looked down silently. Talent. That had indeed been her pride. But now, she had no place to use that talent. Actually, I have a proposal for you. Belinda's voice held a hint of hope. I know someone who is planning to open a new boutique. Ellis looked up. It's a small shop that will handle custom-made clothes. They're looking for a designer. Belinda continued. The salary might be lower than before, but the working hours can be adjusted flexibly. Really? Yes. You can work from home on the designs during your pregnancy. And even after giving birth, you can set your own pace. A small light of hope lit up in Ellis's eyes. But, like this. Your talent is real, no one can deny that, Belinda said firmly. Besides, this city is full of opportunities. It's too early to give up. Outside the window, the spring sunlight gently illuminated the Manhattan streetscape. Ellis took a deep breath. Belinda, thank you. We're family, aren't we? Belinda smiled. Plus, I'm excited too. To meet the 4 little angels. Ellis smiled back slightly. Indeed, there were fears and anxieties. But these children were her own. All right, first let's focus on getting you nourished, Belinda said as she returned to the kitchen. We need to build your strength for the new job. The pleasant aroma of soup began to fill the room. Ellis slowly got up from the sofa and walked to the window. The sky visible between the high-rises was astonishingly clear and blue. There was still hope. Yes, she reassured herself. Life was moving in an unexpected direction, but it wasn't over. A new job. And a new family. 2 weeks later, having regained her strength, Ellis entered the workplace Belinda had introduced her to. This is your workspace. Ellis surveyed the room in an old building. A small alley was visible from the window. It was a far cry from the high-end atelier where she used to work. It's not spacious, but it's sufficient for design work, isn't it? The owner, Margaret Green, a slender woman in her late 50s, had a gentle expression, but her gaze could feel cold at times. Yes, it's fine. Ellis responded politely. Since discovering her pregnancy, she had felt the presence of the little lives growing inside her more each day. Now, she had to be grateful for this job. The first commission is an evening dress for this lady. Margaret handed her a photograph. I know her, Ellis exclaimed without thinking. The photo was of Scott's mother, Veronica. Yes, Belinda recommended you, so I hired you, Margaret said with a meaningful smile. Veronica is a very important client of mine. Don't disappoint her. Ellis felt a chill run down her spine. Was this a coincidence, or? That evening, Ellis called Belinda. Did you know Veronica is a client? Yes, Belinda's voice was calm. But this is an opportunity. A chance for them to reevaluate your talent. Ellis sensed something off in the words. However, she had no other choice. As weeks passed, the job seemed to go well, but a sense of discomfort grew day by day. Over half the orders were from former clients, all somehow connected to Scott's family. Their requests for designs were peculiarly detailed, sometimes unreasonably so. This fabric won't do, one client said, grimacing at the high-quality silk Ellis had carefully chosen. I'd prefer something cheaper looking. Something more. You. Ellis felt the insult embedded in those words clearly. Margaret, Ellis ventured cautiously. About this job. Is there a problem? Margaret's voice was cold. If it's too much, I can find another designer. Ellis felt the weight of those words painfully. A workplace willing to employ a pregnant woman carrying quadruplets was rare. At night, back at her apartment, Ellis opened her laptop and searched for information about Margaret's boutique. She discovered unsettling news. The boutique had only recently come into existence. Its preparations had started just after Ellis was fired from her previous job. And among the investors, a familiar name appeared: L&R Investment Group. The Lawrence family's investment firm. Could it be? Frozen, Ellis stared at the screen. Was this job truly a chance occurrence, or part of someone's plan? Unconsciously, Ellis placed her hand on her belly. Feeling the weight of the growing life inside her, she made up her mind. She needed to find out the truth. But the truth, when it came, was beyond anything she had imagined. As the weeks passed, the summer heat of Manhattan worsened Ellis's condition. Carrying 4 lives made her body increasingly heavy. And climbing to the 4th floor of the old building using the broken elevator became her daily ordeal. Ellis, this dress design is all wrong. Margaret looked over the design Ellis had stayed up all night to complete. But I followed all the client's requests. Your interpretation is wrong, Margaret snapped, tossing the design onto the desk. Redo it by first thing tomorrow morning. With a deep sigh, Ellis turned back to her drawings. She continued to work in the poorly air-conditioned room, wiping sweat from her brow. Every movement from the babies made Ellis pause momentarily. The vigorous movements of the quadruplets drained her strength. Although the doctor had ordered her to rest, she had no such luxury. A client has arrived, the receptionist informed her. It was the 3rd client of the day. Each one dressed in high-end brands and casting somewhat malicious glances. "Oh, your belly has gotten quite big." The client smiled meaningfully as she looked at Ellis's stomach. "I hope it won't inconvenience you." Ellis struggled to maintain her professional demeanor. "I hope your situation doesn't affect the quality of my dress." After the meeting, Ellis finally had a moment to herself. Looking at the clock, it was already 6 p.m. But it seemed she was in for another all-nighter. Make sure to hydrate, Ellis thought as she tried to stand up, but suddenly, everything went dark before her eyes. She sat back down in the chair and took a deep breath. She knew she needed to rest as the doctor had advised, but her situation didn't allow it. Her smartphone rang. It was Belinda. "Ellis, how's work going?" "Okay, I guess." Ellis's voice echoed emptily as she lied. "I've heard good things from Margaret." "Keep it up." After hanging up, Ellis stared out the window. Had she ever walked as energetically as those people outside? As the night deepened, Ellis, facing her new design sketches, struggled with abdominal tightness. The doctor's warning echoed in her mind. You must absolutely avoid any strain. But she couldn't afford to lose this job. Losing it would mean losing her children's future. Late at night, when she finally finished the designs, Ellis was sobbing over her desk. At that moment, she couldn't tell if her tears were from sadness or pain. "Scott, about that woman." Amelia spoke carefully as she observed Scott's expression. In a private room of a high-end restaurant. "Which woman?" "Don't play dumb," Amelia's glossy lips twisted. "Your ex-girlfriend." "I heard she's pregnant." Scott's fork paused mid-air. "Ellis?" "Yes, and with quadruplets," Amelia sipped her tea elegantly. "They aren't yours, are they?" Scott's face drained of color as memories flashed before his eyes, the night before they broke up, their last conversation. "No way. I want to avoid a scandal," Amelia's voice turned cold. "Our wedding is in 2 months. That night, Scott was in his room, gripping his smartphone with Ellis's number displayed. Unable to press the call button. "Scott, we need to talk." Veronica entered without knocking. "I know about Ellis." "Mom. Don't worry. I've already handled it," Veronica informed him calmly. "Belinda has arranged everything." "Arranged?" "For the children's adoption after they're born." "What are you talking about?" "Face reality," Veronica's voice sharpened. "What will happen to the company if it comes out that those children are yours? What about your marriage to Amelia?" "It would all be ruined." Scott was speechless. Outside, Manhattan's night skyline glittered, its lights as hollow as his heart at that moment. Meanwhile, Amelia was busy with final wedding preparations at home. "Amelia, the venue's calling," her mother handed her the phone. After the meeting, Amelia stood in front of the mirror. The pure white wedding dress perfectly accentuated her figure. "Everything will be mine," she murmured. "I won't let anyone interfere." At that time, Ellis was in a corner of the boutique, struggling to breathe. The tightness in her belly was getting stronger each day. "Ellis." Margaret approached her. "Yes, I'll finish this work by tomorrow." "No, that's not what I meant," Margaret smiled meaningfully. "I heard from Belinda after the birth." Ellis felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Don't worry," Margaret reassured gently. "It's all for your sake." Ellis couldn't yet comprehend the full meaning of those words. But deep inside, a great unease began to swirl. With just 2 weeks left until the due date, Ellis waited in the hospital's waiting room for her next checkup. The pregnancy with quadruplets required strict medical supervision. "We should consider hospitalization soon," she was told at her last checkup. Ellis hesitated for a moment. She was near her physical limits but worried about the hospital costs. "Don't worry," Belinda reassured her, squeezing her hand. "I'll arrange everything." Ellis felt something unsettling about those words but quickly dismissed the thought. She needed to focus on what was immediately ahead. "Ellis Carville," a nurse called out, and as Ellis stood up, "Oh, Belinda." An unfamiliar middle-aged woman entered the waiting room. Ellis didn't recognize her. But the woman greeted Belinda familiarly. "Is this her?" The woman looked at Ellis with calculating eyes. "Yes," Belinda nodded slightly. "We are really looking forward to it." At the woman's words, Ellis tilted her head. "Belinda, who is this person?" "Oh, just an acquaintance," Belinda hastily explained. However, the woman continued to smile meaningfully, watching Ellis's belly intently. After the checkup, as Ellis walked down the hospital corridor, she overheard a conversation between the woman and a man who appeared to be her husband. "Are the documents ready?" "Yes, everything is prepared for right after the birth." "But what about the mother herself?" "That's being handled by Belinda." Ellis stopped in her tracks, a chilling premonition running down her spine. "It seems we got the meeting place wrong." Suddenly, Belinda appeared and grabbed Ellis's arm. "About that conversation. Don't worry about it." That night, Ellis, feeling uneasy, reviewed the documents she had received from the hospital. Among them, she found an unfamiliar document. An adoption consent form. The date was left blank, but the detailed conditions had already been filled in, including information about the recipients for each of the 4 babies. Could it be? Trembling, Ellis picked up her smartphone and called Margaret. About that document," Margaret's voice was cold. "Didn't Belinda tell you? Raising 4 children by yourself is impractical." Ellis nearly dropped her phone. Everything was beginning to connect: the job at the boutique, the seemingly kind attitudes, and the look in that woman's eyes. Unconsciously, Ellis placed her hand on her belly. "I won't let anyone take them." Her words sounded more like a prayer than a resolution. "Ellis, keep breathing." The doctor's voice seemed distant as labor began 2 weeks earlier than expected. Ellis was focused only on protecting the 4 lives within her. "The baby's heartbeats are stable," a nurse reassured her. "Prepare for a cesarean section." On the way to the operating room, Ellis recognized a couple in the hallway, the same couple she had seen in the hospital, with Belinda standing beside them. "Let's begin." As the anesthesia took effect, her consciousness faded. The last scene she saw felt ominously like a bad omen. When Ellis awoke, she heard the faint cries of newborns. "All healthy babies," the attending doctor announced with a smile. "2 boys and 2 girls, all healthy." "It's a miraculous probability." Tears filled Ellis's eyes. She had finally met the little lives she had fought so hard to bring into the world. "Let's show you your babies." A nurse pushed Ellis's wheelchair to the front of the neonatal room. Through the glass, she could see the 4 tiny lives. "Congratulations, Ellis." Belinda approached, her voice mixing tension. "I'm glad you could meet the children," Ellis said quietly. "Yes." "Now, about the paperwork." "Paperwork?" "For the adoption." Ellis's body tensed up. "If you're talking about that document, I've already destroyed it." "What are you talking about?" Belinda's voice turned cold. "I did this thinking of you. You tried to give my children away to strangers without my consent. You couldn't possibly raise 4 kids." Belinda exploded. "I couldn't have children myself. Continuously blamed by my husband's parents. And you." The truth was now clear. The hidden jealousy and resentment behind her aunt's kindness. "Nurse." Ellis called out loudly. Hospital security was summoned, and Belinda and the couple were asked to leave. That night, Ellis lay alone in the hospital room, staring at the ceiling. Then her smartphone rang. It was Scott, likely having heard about the birth. Ellis didn't answer the phone. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. Voices of nurses arranging enhanced surveillance for the quadruplets reached her ears. Ellis covered her face with her hands, unable to stop crying. She was certain she couldn't continue living in this city with her children. Resolved, Ellis decided to return to her hometown, to her father. However, there was one last thing left undone: Scott. And Amelia's wedding was only a week away. The cathedral on Central Park South was enveloped in a festive atmosphere from the morning. An arch of pure white flowers was set up at the entrance, and a red carpet covered the marble stairs. Luxurious limousines arrived one after another, and celebrities clad in designer brands alighted. Amidst the flash of the tabloid reporters, Amelia's bridal gown was rumored to cost $500,000. From across the street, Ellis observed the glamorous scene. It had only been 2 weeks since she gave birth. The designer suits that once fit her perfectly were now too large, and she had reluctantly purchased a cheap dress as her pregnancy. And the grueling work had caused her to lose a significant amount of weight, leaving her cheeks hollow and dark circles under her eyes. "Are you really going to go?" the taxi driver asked worriedly. "Yes." Ellis took a deep breath. She had left her quadruplets in the care of the nurses at the hospital's nursery, promising to return in just 2 hours. The cathedral's interior was even more lavishly decorated. From ceiling to floor, Pure white lilies and roses bloomed in abundance. Crystal chandeliers cast a gentle light, and sunlight streaming through the stained glass illuminated the altar divinely. Ellis slipped quietly into a back seat. She had once dreamed of exchanging vows in such a place. In the front, Amelia entered on her father's arm. Her custom-made off-shoulder dress spread out like a cloud, sprinkled with Swarovski crystals, her face wearing a smug smile. At the altar, Scott stood in a brand-new, custom-tailored tuxedo, his expression tense. Behind him, Veronica looked on with a satisfied expression. "Do you take Amelia Fairfax to be your wife?" As the priest's voice echoed through the cathedral, Ellis slowly stood up. Her postpartum body was heavy, and her legs trembled. "Wait." With that single word, all 300 guests turned to look back. Amelia's expression froze into an icy glare. "What are you doing here?" Amelia's voice was laced with cold anger. "You dare come here in those rags?" Ellis stepped into the aisle. She knew the navy dress from the department store's discount rack was out of place. But such concerns no longer mattered to her. "As far as I know," Amelia cast a haughty look, "someone of your background shouldn't be allowed in this church." Murmurs rose among the attendees. Ellis felt the gaze of her former colleagues. They looked at her emaciated figure with pity and fear. Then, Ellis began to speak. "Amelia, you're right," Ellis spoke slowly. "I might not belong in a place like this. But there's a truth that everyone here needs to know." Ellis pulled an envelope from her handbag. It was a birth certificate with the hospital's official letterhead, detailing the birth time and weight of the quadruplets. "This is the birth record from 2 weeks ago," Ellis continued, her voice firm yet gentle. "And this is a photo from the newborn room." The photo showed 4 babies sleeping side by side in the nursery. "The father of these children is that man there," Ellis pointed at Scott. "Nonsense," Veronica stepped forward. "Such a ridiculous fabrication." "A fabrication?" Ellis's voice was calm. "You can verify everything with the Manhattan General Hospital database. Scott, if you have the courage to take a DNA test." The room fell silent. Ellis's frail figure was stark against the lavish decor. "Scott," Ellis locked eyes with him. "You knew. You discarded me, mocked me, and ignored all my attempts to reach out, all leading up to today." Scott's face paled, his hands visibly shaking. "You should have kept quiet." Amelia suddenly shouted. "After all I did to convince your mother. The children were supposed to be adopted." "Oh." Amelia covered her mouth as she realized her slip. But it was too late. The audience buzzed. Guests in the front row exchanged glances. "No way, those children." An elderly lady gasped. Ellis took a deep breath. "I came here to tell the truth. To show how much deceit this wedding was built upon." Edward Fairfax slowly stood up in the front row. His face bore an expression of unprecedented severity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward's voice filled the cathedral, "this ceremony is over." "Father!" Amelia's voice shrieked. Without looking back at his daughter's cries, Edward moved forward. The assembled tycoons watched in taut silence. "I deeply apologize to everyone gathered here." Edward's voice was resolute, even amid the tension. "As the Fairfax family, such." Veronica tried to intervene. "Be quiet, Mrs. Lawrence." Edward's tone contained an uncharacteristic chill. "Your son chose to abandon his children, push their mother to the brink, and then attempted to take those children away. That is an undeniable fact." Scott remained silent, unable to move. Father, but Amelia tried to speak again. Silence. Edward turned a stern gaze on his daughter. So, you were part of this despicable plan as well. Only Edward's footsteps echoed in the cathedral as he approached Ellis. Miss Carville. Ellis involuntarily caught her breath. I sincerely apologize for the treatment you and your children have received. Edward apologized deeply before 300 guests. A gesture unseen from him in public before. All business with the Lawrence family is hereby suspended. Edward turned back with calm finality. All transactions, investments, everything with our bank. Veronica's face turned pale. The suspension of dealings with the Fairfax family would be a fatal blow to their hotel chain, understood by all present. And then, Amelia. Edward turned back to his daughter with deep disappointment in his eyes. Your extravagant lifestyle ends today. I will no longer tolerate your wasteful spending relying on our family's wealth. But, Father, by tomorrow, you must leave the house, find a place to live, secure a job, and support yourself. You should have been doing this all along. Amelia collapsed to her knees, beginning to sob. Her figure, draped in a pure white wedding dress, looked both pitiful and ludicrous. As for compensation to the Carville family, Edward continued when Ellis quietly raised her hand. That won't be necessary. But there are things that money can't solve. Ellis chose her words carefully. I only wanted to bring the truth to light. No more than that. Edward nodded deeply, his eyes reflecting profound respect for this young mother. At least, he said, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket. Should you need anything, please contact me anytime. I personally will offer whatever support I can. Ellis quietly accepted the card, but her hand was already clenched tightly. She could trust no one anymore. Sunlight streamed through the cathedral's stained glass, casting a rainbow of light around her. In that light, Ellis quietly turned her back. Her quadruplets were waiting for her. Are you really going back? In the hospital room at Manhattan General, a nurse sorted through the discharge papers for the quadruplets as she asked Ellis, who had been discharged a week ago. And the babies were finally getting their own discharge approval. Yes. The 4 babies, Matthew, Mark, Madeline, and Maria, were sleeping soundly. Turning down Mr. Fairfax's offer, the nurse continued with concern. He could have supported a new life for you in Manhattan. It's enough. Ellis shook her head quietly. Since the incident at the wedding, Edward Fairfax had repeatedly offered help, new apartments in Manhattan, support for child-rearing, job introductions. But Ellis had made up her mind. There was a knock on the hospital room door. Ellis, are you ready? The voice belonged to John Carville, Ellis's father. A large man in work clothes entered the room with a slight embarrassment. Dad, that car. Yes, Luke lent it to us. John scratched his head, embarrassed. It's an SUV used for deliveries at the mill. We've got it for a few days. Ellis's eyes watered. Normally, her father drove an old, small truck. But today, he had come in a large black SUV. We managed to get all the car seats, John continued proudly. 2 from church friends, 1 from a recycling shop. And I had to go to the next town for the last one. Dad. Everyone pitched in, John smiled. Ellis's phone rang, it was Belinda calling. Ellis silently pressed the button to decline the call. Then she stared at the screen, displaying numerous unread messages from Scott, from Belinda, from former colleagues. She couldn't trust anyone. But let's make sure everything's safely installed, the nurse went to check the car seats. John attentively listened to each explanation, checking the fit multiple times with his large hands. "Perfect," the nurse approved. "Sir, you've prepared well." Ellis completed the last of the discharge procedures. When she had come to this city with dreams 10 years ago, it seemed like a distant past now. "A new life is waiting for you," the attending doctor said kindly as she was about to leave. Ellis carefully secured the quadruplets in their car seats and sat in the passenger seat. John, looking a bit nervous, took the wheel. "Welcome back." Ellis nodded slightly at her father's words. The car slowly left the streets of Manhattan. In the back seat, 4 little lives were peacefully asleep. As they entered the familiar town at dusk, the Blue Ridge Mountains cast deep shadows against the orange sunset. Ellis quietly watched the familiar scenery from the car window. "We're here." John parked in front of the old furniture workshop. The 2-story house attached to the workshop was where Ellis had grown up. The white paint was slightly peeling, and the porch's wooden railings creaked, just as she remembered. John carefully carried the babies, still in their car seats, inside the house. "This is your new home." His rough carpenter's hands gently stroked his grandchildren. Ellis felt warmth in her heart. However, the warm air did not last long. "Well, look who's back," a cold gaze came from the window of the neighboring house. Ellis tried to wave a greeting, but the elderly woman curtly shut her window. The next morning, Ellis went to the local supermarket to prepare milk for the babies. People in the store began whispering as soon as they saw her. "That girl's back from New York. With 4 children. She's putting such a burden on her father." Cold stares and words from people who once greeted me warmly. Ellis quickly filled her basket and headed to the checkout. The cashier was all business, no smile or small talk. As she passed the church on her way home, she ran into a crowd just leaving Sunday service. Women under flamboyant hats sent mixed glances of curiosity and judgment her way. Ellis tried to hurry past, head down, but the words she overheard were merciless. "She's a single mother now. I thought she had more sense." Back home, the quadruplets started crying all at once. John was busy in the workshop. Alone, Ellis struggled to soothe the babies. Someone was peering into the house from outside. As she closed the curtains, Ellis fought back tears. The hurt from New York continued in this town, marked not by urban coldness but by betrayal from familiar faces. That night, after putting the babies to bed, Ellis sat by the window. The moon over the mountains cast a faint light. "Are you okay?" John, having finished his work, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," Ellis managed a brave smile. "We have you, Dad." He said nothing, just squeezed her shoulder tighter. The cold stares from the townspeople would continue. But this house held a certain warmth. For now, that was enough to believe in. Wood delivery. At the workshop entrance, Ellis paused her care of the babies to help her father with the paperwork. "Luke," she exclaimed. The owner of the sawmill who had lent them the SUV. "Welcome back," Luke smiled shyly. "How are the babies?" As a cry came from the back, Ellis started to respond. But John emerged, cradling Madeline. "Looks like Madeline's awake," he said, soothing his granddaughter. "Thanks for the SUV," Ellis started, but Luke waved her off. "Glad it helped." But he peered at a blueprint on the workbench. "What's this?" It was a design for a quadruple stroller, still in the prototype phase. John had been sketching in his spare moments. Still figuring it out, John admitted shyly. "A wooden frame, safe for 4. That's interesting. Luke peered closer. They soon lost themselves in technical discussions. Ellis interjected, and they snapped back to reality. Sorry, got carried away with work talk, John apologized. No, it's a wooden stroller? Don't worry, Luke assured her. It's made by the best craftsman in town. Plus, he gestured to the freshly delivered wood, I made sure to pick the finest quality. Suddenly, the other triplets started crying. I've got it, Ellis moved to tend to them, but Luke stood first. Let me help. What followed was an unusual scene, the sawmill owner holding a baby. John discussing design adjustments, Ellis preparing milk. If we adjust this column angle, Luke suggested while bouncing Matthew. It should absorb more shock. Good idea, John immediately modified the blueprint. Ellis, somewhat overwhelmed, felt a warmth in this unexpected gathering. This stroller will surely be the talk of the town, Luke commented. In a good way. Ellis nodded. Her father's handmade stroller felt like more than just an item. It was becoming something precious. Can I come by tomorrow? Luke asked as he left. For more design tips, and he glanced over at the babies. To practice babysitting. At those words, John gave a meaningful smile. Ellis felt a small warmth in her heart again. A few days later. Ellis, is this okay? John wheeled out a finished wooden stroller. Made of warm oak. With 4 carefully crafted seats and even a suspension system. Dad, it's wonderful. Ellis admired the detail, including a pink linen sunshade Luke had suggested. Let's try it out tomorrow. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Hello, Ellis Carville speaking. Ellis? It's me. The high school teacher whose daughter's prom dress you made 3 years ago. Ellis remembered her voice. It's the local high school teacher. Could you make my daughter's wedding dress? Your design was wonderful. This call would change Ellis's life. Weeks later, her room overflowed with fabric samples and sketches. The quadruplets slept in wooden cribs John had made as Ellis sewed, frequently checking on her children's peaceful faces. Another new request? Luke had stopped by while delivering wood, Matthew cradled in his arms as usual. Strangely, Matthew always seemed to cheer up when Luke held him. Yes, this time it's a dress for a graduation party. The requests had spread by word of mouth. Initially, the cold stares from the locals had hurt her. But the smiles of brides and graduates wearing her dresses had gradually changed. The atmosphere of the town. Ellis, may I have a word? John entered the room, unusually nervous. I've renovated the 2nd floor of the workshop. Ellis followed her father upstairs to find a small atelier created just for her. Large windows offered views of the mountains and bathed the room in natural light. I thought you could use it for fittings and consultations with clients. Ellis was speechless. Mirrors had been installed on the walls. And there was even a platform for measurements, all crafted by her father's hands. Dad. Luke helped out too, John said, slightly embarrassed. He's quite skilled as a carpenter, you know. A new life was taking shape for her in this town, a different kind of splendor from the glitz of New York, but it was a genuine happiness. Oh, by the way, Luke added as if he had just remembered. People around town are saying good things about your dresses. Ellis nodded slightly. This was good. She could take it one step at a time. Confident in her path forward with her 4 children and she watched Luke, struggling a bit as he tried to entertain the babies, with a tender look. Look at that stroller. Isn't it lovely? That's John's work. The quadruplets have gotten so big. The voices of the townspeople were warmer than before. Ellis was pushing the custom-made wooden stroller to the supermarket. Alone today as Luke couldn't leave the sawmill. Wait, Ellis. The cashier, who had once been so cold to her, hurried over. Let me help you with that. She peered into the stroller at the growing babies. And by the way, she smiled knowingly. I've noticed the sawmill truck stopping by your place almost every day. Ellis flushed with embarrassment. Oh, Ellis. A woman passing by called out to her. We're setting up a display of your dresses at the church bazaar. What? Your talent is the pride of our town. Those words warmed Ellis's heart. And, the woman added kindly, it's really good to see Luke standing by you. At dusk, Luke took the quadruplets to the park while Ellis worked in her atelier. Watching them from the window. They look happy. John sat beside his daughter after finishing his work. Dad. Ellis hesitated slightly. Is it okay for me to be happy again? John silently hugged her. Your happiness is my happiness. Their laughter and Luke's responding calls filled the park. As the town faded into the evening. Like this, you can create a natural drape with the fabric. Ellis taught a group of young students in her atelier by the large sunlit windows, where the quadruplets had their play area. Ellis, can I become a dress designer too? Asked a girl about to graduate high school. Of course, you can, Ellis smiled gently. If you don't give up on your dreams, they will surely come true. Her weekend design classes were popular among the town's youth. Using her New York experience, Ellis taught meticulously from the basics. Ellis, can I have a moment? Her father's voice called from downstairs. After setting her students a task, she went down to the workshop. There's been a talk from the town's tourism board, John said, a bit shyly. They want to promote our town as a hub for arts, using your atelier as a main attraction. Ellis was astonished. The town that once looked at her coldly now recognized and even took pride in her skills. And, John continued, Luke wants to open part of the sawmill land as a crafts village. A crafts village? Yes. For your students to eventually have their own shops. Just then, footsteps hurried down the stairs. Ellis. The high school girl ran up excitedly. Look what I've made. She clutched her first completed sketch, clumsy but showing unmistakable talent. Wonderful, Ellis praised sincerely. You'll definitely make it. In the middle of her sentence, the doorbell rang. Coming. When she opened the door, a group of neighborhood housewives gathered there. Ellis, we want to hold a fashion show at the town's Harvest Festival. We'd love to showcase your students' work too. We'll help out. Touched by their warm offer, Ellis felt a lump in her throat. That night, after putting the children to bed, Ellis gazed out the atelier window at the town lights. You're still up. Luke had returned after finishing his final meeting. Hey, Luke, Ellis turned to him. I think there's still so much I can do in this town. Yes, Luke nodded gently. You have the power to inspire dreams in people. Outside the window, the shadows of the mountains were illuminated by the moonlight. Ellis made a promise in her heart. To someday return the warmth she had received to this town. And to teach her quadruplets the beauty of chasing dreams. This town had taught her the meaning of a new life, it was the joy of giving. The sun will be up soon, Luke said, holding the quadruplets, as the family awaited the sunrise at the mountain top. Having a sunrise picnic for Ellis's birthday had become a family tradition. Mom, look. Madeline pointed at the sky. The orange light was slowly spreading from behind the mountains. Maria squinted sleepily at the sunrise on Luke's shoulder. Matthew and Marcus were observing the landscape through a telescope that John had made. "It's beautiful," Ella sighed, listening to her children's excited voices. 3 years ago, when she returned home, exhausted and hurt, she could never have imagined such happiness. Now, she was surrounded by a family bound by genuine affection. "Ellis," Luke said softly. "The kids have something they want to say." The quadruplets gathered around Ellis. "Happy birthday, Mom. We made this together." Madeline handed her a small wooden box. Inside, there was a handmade brooch combining wood and fabric. "Grandpa and Daddy helped," Maria explained happily. "Daddy carved the wood," Matthew said proudly. "Grandpa taught us the design," Marcus continued. Ellis felt her eyes well up. "I have something too." Luke pulled out a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple pearl ring, understated yet radiating a warm, beautiful luster. "The wedding will have dresses made by your students," Luke said bashfully. "Everyone in town is looking forward to it." Just then, the sun fully emerged. A new day began. The mountains glowed golden, and the valley mist cleared. "Look, Mom, Dad," Madeline exclaimed. "There's a rainbow." Indeed, a small rainbow formed amid the morning mist. Ellis took a deep breath. The glamorous life she once dreamed of in New York felt like a distant memory. But here, in this place, she had found true happiness. "Hey," Ellis leaned into Luke. "How about we hold our wedding at the craft village?" "That sounds great," Luke agreed. "A wedding we all build together." And afterwards, John added meaningfully, "We could set up a corner of the craft village for Ellis's wedding dress shop." The children cheered. Luke smiled warmly, and John nodded in satisfaction. Wrapped in this warm atmosphere, Ellis was certain this was where she belonged. The city's hustle and her past wounds no longer tormented her. Here, there was genuine love and new dreams. As the sun bathed the mountains in a gentle light, a new day began. Ellis's heart was resolute. Here, with this family, she would continue her journey. It was the comfort of a wounded bird that had finally found its nest.